So now, please welcome the official, non-official, non-sponsor of the Savannah Bananas, but a big fan. Please welcome John Fletcher.
Well, thank you, my friend Jesse Cole, owner of the Savannah Bananas, and welcome to this edition of 15 on Fridays with Fletch. Our guest today is the most read columnist in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He's the guru for food, opinion, politics, and he's also on Channel 8's Inside Texas Politics. He's all over Facebook and Twitter, pretty much any social media you can imagine, and he's celebrating 54 years in journalism, starting at the Fort Worth Press, then the Austin American-Statesman, the Dallas Times-Herald Morning News, and now the Star-Telegram.
That's right, John. I can't hold a job.
I can't believe, but you've only been at the Star-Telegram since what, 1987?
Oh, I just tell people since last century, once you get back in the 1900s, it doesn't matter anymore.
Hey, that's great. And you won the Texas Press Association's Golden 50 Award a couple of years ago. That's a big achievement.
Well,
and so
it just means I've lasted a long time. You said I was the most read columnist. These days, that's like being the fastest turtle in the race, you know.
that's it. Well, we appreciate you joining us. So let's rock and roll here. You are the busiest man in town with your food columns, opinion columns, and special features and politics. How do you balance it all?
You know, I just stay crazy all the time. I can be in the middle of a long political read and somebody will say, hey, did you know about a pizzeria in Hazel? And so I'll drop what I'm doing and switch to that. But I try to keep two lives and two personalities going, this dual personality of news and politics and food. And I'm really lucky because writing about more than one thing has helped me keep my job and keep my readership. And I'm grateful for the readers of the Star-Telegram. And I tell people, if you don't like something you read in the news column, read the food column or vice versa.
That's great. Well, and you've been covering the food scene for over 40 years with your Eats Beats. How did you start it?
I had been in sports most of my career coming up, and then I moved to special projects. I was over some news projects, investigations, and I moved to features. They wanted me to kind of learn my way around the newsroom and learn different departments. So I moved to features. And I got over there and we had a weekend guide named Star Time. It was this Friday tabloid section that came out. And back then, John, this is how far long ago it was. It was all about new movies and restaurants and where to go out, who was in the clubs that weekend, what music bands were in the clubs. And so, they were, thought that the section was kind of dull and that it needed some more young spirit. And back then, John, I was the one who brought that young spirit. I took over the weekend guide and started writing about food and dining and where to go. And they let me hire a restaurant critic, but I kept writing about food. I got interested in food because, you come up in Fort Worth, you learn about food and where to go. And then as a sports writer, you go where the coaches go. You learn about chicken fried steak and barbecue and food like that. And I started writing about food. I found out that Fort Worth is kind of a world headquarters of food like that. When I read the gourmet writers, Jane and Michael Stern had this book called Road Food. It was this guide to little, small character diners and cafes all over the country. And the place when you get west of the Mississippi, the city that had the most restaurants that were really definitive, local character, locally owned, where you really wanted to go if you were in town to know local people, was San Francisco, great restaurant town. And the city with the next most restaurants that were really definitive of the region was Santa Fe. But the city with the third most was Fort Worth. They listed Massey's Chicken Fried Steak and Kincaid's Hamburgers and Cattleman's Steakhouse for all the big cattle portraits on the wall and Carson's Deli. And they listed several other restaurants. And Fort Worth, it turned out, was kind of this nationally known for local comfort Texas food.
Well, and in a sense, I felt like Fort Worth lost a little bit of its soul when Massey's closed. That was one of my favorite places to go for their pies and of course, the mashed potatoes and chicken fried steak. So tell us, how can you go to lunch or dinner with friends and enjoy the moment without having the food critic persona show up?
Well, I mean, the food critic persona is not supposed to show up because I'm not supposed to even, do anything I mean, you don't go in and say, I tell people if someone walks in and says, I'm from the paper and I want a free dinner, then they're not from the paper.
Right.
because, we don't go in and call attention to ourselves in any way. Nowadays it's so much easier, John, because it used to be that I would carry a little pocket notepad, and you really stood out if you had a pocket notepad and you were jotting down little notes to yourself during lunch. People got curious about that. But nowadays, you just take out your phone and start taking pictures of your chicken salad sandwich, and you're just like everybody else in the restaurant. Everybody's taking food pictures and wants to share their food pictures, so it doesn't call any attention at all.
Well, so tell us, I know we've got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up. What are some tips that you want to give us about holiday dining?
I think my big tip for everybody is that the day after the holiday is the day that you want to go to some really busy restaurant. If you've always wanted to go to Joe T's and sit on the patio without waiting in line, if you've always wanted to go to Goldie's or Panther City or one of the really busy barbecue restaurants, the best day to go to a really busy restaurant is at lunch the day after the holiday. I promise you, if they're open on New Year's Day, which Joe T's is, a lot of people won't get up on New Year's morning. They won't even get up till New Year's afternoon. So the easiest time to go to Joe T's and have lunch and sit on the patio if it's nice is New Year's Day, New Year's lunch. It's the same way for the day after Thanksgiving, the day after St. Patrick's Day, the day after Valentine's night, the day after the 4th of July. Nights where everybody stayed up late and had a big dinner. The next day is the time to go to the restaurant you've always wanted to go to. As far as dining on Thanksgiving and Christmas, most of the restaurants are looking for business. They'll almost all will be open with some sort of Thanksgiving deal. A few of them will open on Christmas. The hotels are always open. You can get everything from I think it's $160 Thanksgiving buffet over at the Ritz-Carlton in Irving. Or if you want, you can go eat at Luby's. And I think people will eat at Luby's nonstop from opening to close on Thanksgiving.
So how do you curate which restaurants to include with your various features? Because I mean, you've got a zillion to choose from.
Yeah, it's kind of a matter of news judgment. It's like picking, well, what do people really want to read about? And, you look at what people are talking about on social media and what are people sharing notes with each other about it. And what restaurants kind of have the buzz. And you look at some of the tools like Google Trends sometimes and compare and say, well, are more people talking about this place or this place? And are more people talking about Pacific Table or Bunnell's, things like that. And then you look at the reservations and what's a tight reservation? What do people really want to get into? Those are the restaurants you want to write about. You want to write about the restaurants where people want to go and where people are talking about. Every now and then you find a little obscure place that deserves attention, but then you have to explain what it is and where it is and why it deserves attention and try to get people out. It used to be we wrote about new places that nobody knew about. Now we write about something new at places that people talk about or know about. And we don't try to go out anymore and chase down all the new restaurants. Most of them will be closed again in a few months anyway.
What's the most eclectic or bizarre dining experience you've ever had?
Oh, let's see, most eclectic. I mean, I really miss my old friends. I miss Virgie Martinez with Mi Cocinita in Fort Worth, where
Mhm.
you walk down the garage behind her house on the south side, and she had a restaurant in the garage. They had, when it first started, it was just a row of stoves, a row of regular, consumer kitchen stoves that they had in the garage for tamales and beans and so forth. And her mother would dish up a plate of Mexican food, and there was a counter and a cash register in front of the stoves, and that was it. They decorated it more elaborately as a restaurant. People say, well, how could it be? How could it operate? Well, it was kind of, instead of being grandfathered in, it was mothered in because the mother actually was selling tamales there before the property was owned. So it operated there forever in the middle of a residential neighborhood behind the house. You'd walk back to the garage. Santos Aguileros on the north side. Both Virginia and Santos have passed away now, but Santos, the same thing, had a little white shack on North Grove, and you walk up, it had no sign, no markings at all, and you'd look for the White House with the aqua colored door, and you'd walk up the steps and walk in, and he had 3 booths in the front, and he would be cooking his one special a day, and either you had fried chicken or enchiladas whatever he cooked that day. But you would walk in and have his special and thank him, and it'd be delicious.
Well, you talked about Joe T's. I remember explaining when I was at TCU to my parents about Joe T's, and we finally took them one time, and Dad said, "I've never heard of this place." And so we finally went in there. Of course, that was back when, you walk through the kitchen, on your way to go to the restaurant. And Dad said, "Oh, this is Garcia's. I eat here twice a week. I never knew what this Joe T's things was that you young people were talking about." So yeah, it's great when you have all the great stories.
Well, in the beginning, it was Joe T's Barbecue. Joe Garcia opened a
Yeah.
barbecue place. He worked in the packing houses, and he decided he was going to open a barbecue place and sell barbecue. And they rented out that little white shack was originally a Greek grocery store. So he rented a place that had been a Greek grocery and opened his barbecue place with a pit. Well, one day after a couple of months, he was building up a good business, but one day Joe was sick. He couldn't put the meat on the pit. So the people came for lunch, and Jessie, his wife, said, "I'm sorry, Joe's sick. All I can do is I make you some quesadillas, and I can make you quesadillas, and I can make you some little flautas." And so that's what the first Tex-Mex dinner at Joe T's was quesadillas on corn tortillas. And they kept coming back, and when Joe came back, they said, "Well, we want Jesse's food. To have Jesse serve more of our food." So that's really how it started.
Wow. Well, you and I had a mutual friend many years ago in Pete Kendall, who I knew at the Cleveland Times Review, and of course, y'all were together at the Fort Worth Press. Give us a brief story about you and Pete.
Pete was far more literate than I am. Pete loved the great writers, the New Yorker. He was a sports writer in Cleveland, but he was, really a writer who just happened to get paid for covering Yellow Jacket sports. But he loved the great writers, the New Yorker, the Benchleys. His hero was A.J. Liebling, the great reporter and press critic. And once Pete and I loaded into his car, and he took me out to see his college mentor. He went to the University of New Mexico, where he had a journalism professor named Tony Hillerman. And so we went out and spent the weekend in Albuquerque with Tony Hillerman, who had just written, I think, his second or third detective novel at the time. Of course, he went on to be a great novelist, but it was great. Tony wanted us to bring, since we were coming from Texas, he wanted us to get copies of the San Antonio News at the time, which was this sensational Murdoch newspaper
Oh,
with
yeah.
tabloid headlines. And so he wanted us to bring all the copies of the San Antonio News we could, so he could laugh at them. You couldn't see things on the internet back then. So we sat around and laughed at the garish headlines in the San Antonio News. But, Pete loved writing and good writers. His family lived in Glen Rose and sold books where they were good friends with John Graves and all the hard work down there. And, just Pete would always have some literary reference to everything. Of course, he got me to read A.J. Liebling, who I still think is the best writer on press and media ever. And certainly A.J. Liebling predicted a lot of what goes on now in the media. He wrote about newspapers back when there were 17 newspapers in every town that had 17 different political viewpoints instead of 17 different websites, but it was all basically the same.
Well, in closing, tell us, I know you had a great article the other day. If we want to see some of the celebrities from Landman when they're in Fort Worth area, just kind of share with us again what you wrote about the other day about where we're going to find them.
Well, I think that obviously the number one place is the Bowie House, and I think that's where people go, to the Bowie House Hotel. The last time my wife and I went for brunch, Demi Moore was at the valet stand waiting for her Uber, and there's no telling who you'll see pop up in the Bowie House Hotel. But I think a lot of the celebrities go to B&B Butchers in Clear Fork for steaks. Obviously, they go to Joe T's because the family there celebrates them, and Joe T's is big enough. They have all the celebrities come to town, and they're able to find a little kind of private place for them to have their group. But I think Joe Cheese is a common place. And then I saw where Billy Bob Thornton said that he likes to go to the grill. Oh gosh, what is it in Weatherford? Flips Ships. I can't really think of the guy's name, but he likes to go to an old dive in Weatherford and have a beer. I think the nice thing about having a Landman here is that they say people seem to be all over Fort Worth, and the shooting and the stars seem to be all over Fort Worth.
That's great. Well, then, of course, John Hamm is a big fan of our friend Burke Harvey at Curly's Frozen Custard, too.
I think John's been in the drive-through line.
Yes, it. That's great. Well, Bud, thank you so much for joining us. This is wonderful. I'm going to have you back again sometime, but we thank you so much. And please join us again next week when we'll be talking about Small Business Saturday on 15 on Fridays with Fletch.